I did enjoy my time in local TV. I did 2.5 years in DC, but it sort of illustrated to me some of the inveterate issues with TV. Even if I knew 90-mile-an-hour winds were hitting Metro, which is exactly what happened on July 29th, 2023, I was begging to break into programming. Couldn't do it. Football was on. A viewer died, but I couldn't break in. My bread and butter is that I want to be the person who is leading people through severe weather events. If I can't do that at a TV station, I'll go somewhere where I can do that.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Ingram, and welcome to AEM's Behind the Forecast, part of our Talking with the Experts podcast. On today's episode, we're talking with Matthew Cappucci. If you've read the Washington Post, you might recognize his name. He's a member of the Post's Capitol Weather Gang. In fact, he's actually been contributing to the Washington Post since he was 18 years old. This child prodigy was also the youngest ever presenter at the American Meteorological Society, where he delivered an abstract on outflow boundary related waterspouts at the tender age of 14. And then would go on to get his degree in atmospheric sciences from Harvard University. Beyond his work at the Post, Matthew is a storm chaser. He is a previous on-air meteorologist for Fox 5, and now he's also the senior meteorologist for the MyRadar app. He makes regular appearances on NPR, BBC News, DW News, and Sky News Arabia. He's the author of 2 books. First, his autobiographical Looking Up, The True Adventures of a Storm-Chasing Weather Nerd, and his more recent Extreme Weather for Kids. Now let's dive in and go behind the forecast with Matthew Cappucci. Matthew, welcome to the show. It is so great to have you today.
Hey, it is good to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, tell us where it all started, this whole spark in meteorology. You have a clearly amazing career, but where did it all begin?
I was like 2 years old and I'd be staring out the window at the anemometers, the wind meters spinning on my neighbor's roof. When I was 5, I watched my first documentary on tornadoes. When I was 7, I bought a video camera so I could storm chase around the neighborhood. And granted, I grew up in Massachusetts, so it's not like I was really chasing tornadoes. I was 9 years old doing the weather on the PA announcements at the elementary school. And it's been like that ever since. There really was no wavering, no change of passion. I always knew what I wanted to do for a career. And I get to do it every day, which is such a surreal thing.
Wow, that's really incredible. Your school announcements, what was that like? Were you so nervous, or did it just come naturally to you even at that age?
It just came pretty much naturally. It's one of those things where if you told me you were putting me on, I don't know, some platform where I had to talk about something I didn't know, I'd be petrified. But if it's me talking about weather, I know weather. And even back then, I knew enough that I could be fine in the school announcements.
So did you figure out just in your own brain growing up with the anemometer spinning on your neighbor's roof, did you know there's something moving it and you wanted to figure out what it was? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I remember being probably like 2, 3 years old and wondering why was it spinning. And when I was about 4 or 5, my parents got me this, among other things, this little wind book. And it was a picture book and it had like 20 different types of wind. And nowadays I can look back and realize much of the book was erroneous, but I remember there was this one page on like waterspouts and it showed this little column of water being sucked up into the sky with fish flying. And granted, we all know that's apocryphal, but as a 4 or 5-year-old, I was captivated and I was like, what are these things? And so I'd start drawing pictures of waterspouts. And I remember one time my mother was watching, I think, House Hunters International, and there was a scene where in some of the B-roll they used, I don't know if it was the Bahamas or whatever, there were waterspouts in the background, and I was just hooked on waterspouts and tornadoes. When I was 7 and I had that video camera, I'd be narrating so much, I'd be like, I think a tornado's going to form. And obviously, I was in Massachusetts, that wasn't happening. But my sister is the opposite of me. She's 4 years younger, petrified of all things weather. And we had to ban the word tornado from the household when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, because anytime there'd be a mention of foul weather or tornado or whatever, Emily would just lose it. And she still hates severe weather. So we grew up on Cape Cod. To get to work, she has worked for years at a grocery store. She has to cross the Sagamore Bridge. And I remember a few weeks ago, she was texting me. She's like, I think a storm's coming. I don't know if I should cross the bridge. I'm like, Emily, you're fine. Cross the bridge.
Wow. It's funny you say that and bring that up because for me, I was scared of weather growing up, but that made me want to learn about it so I wouldn't be afraid of it anymore. So I'm curious, has she wanted to learn from you how it works, why it is scary, the why behind tornadoes?
I think Emily just thinks I'm a freak. In
Oh,
high
she
school,
does?
she used to tell her friends that I was adopted, which I'm not.
A true brother-sister relationship.
She's very sweet. I think she's 24 now. Yeah, she's 4 years younger than me, and she works as an early intervention specialist for troubled kids or kids who come from difficult backgrounds. But I've invited her informally to come storm chasing. She's welcome to come anytime. I don't know if she can clear 3-4 weeks from her schedule to fly down to Oklahoma. Interestingly, my mother actually wants to come this year. Kathleen has committed to chasing storms. I just bought her own personalized hard hat for giant hail. And my mother and father have supported me since birth. They're the ones who helped me get this video camera when I was 7. Or my mother took me down to DC for weather camp when I was like 11 or 12. They've been there every step of the way. And I think only now has my mother realized, wow, he's grown up and he does this professionally. I guess he's doing it safely. I'll come along for the ride. And she wants to see a tornado, but more than that, she is fascinated by the idea of seeing big hail. And it's interesting, growing up on Cape Cod, we rarely ever got hail. I remember there was this one time on August 16th, 2008. I was just about to enter 6th grade. And back then, I didn't have the MyRadar app. I didn't have any radar apps. I didn't even have a phone. I had we had a family computer and we had dial-up. And even in 2008, and to get one radar frame, you had to wait like 2-3 minutes for it to download, just a JPEG. And I remember using the Channel 5 app or Channel 5 website in Boston, and it loaded this thing, and I knew a storm was coming, and it said something like, teacup size hail possible, or golf ball size hail possible. And little 11-year-old me ran downstairs. I was like, Mom, Dad, pull your cars in the garage. Golf balls are coming. And they're like, sure, whatever you say. Okay, crazy. But they humored me, and my mother pulled her car into the garage, and then my dad's truck had to stay outside. And I went to bed. I didn't think too much of it. And it was around 8 o'clock, 9 at night. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting upstairs, and it had stormed. The storm came through, and the rain stopped, and it started to brighten. And then my mother kind of yelped from downstairs, and that rarely ever happened. She's not a dramatic person. And I sort of rushed down the stairs, and there was just this wall of white coming down the street. If I hadn't known any better, it would have looked like a tornado. But it was an incredibly dense hail shaft. And next thing you knew, all the trees were largely stripped bare of vegetation on Cape Cod. And we were getting solid golf ball size hail, and the cars were dented. And I was loving it. And I went out to the front yard, and I tried to salvage as much hail as possibly could be salvaged. And that was the first time any of us had really experienced big hail. Nowadays, obviously, I'm driving into baseball, softball-sized hailstorms all the time. But I think to my parents who grew up on Cape Cod, it's still such a mystical thing. And so my mother really wants to come storm chasing and see a tornado. But more than that, she wants to hold giant hail. So we'll make that happen.
So that early passion clearly set a foundation for everything that has followed. I want to step into the early arc of your journey because you moved quickly from fascination to doing real work in the field. Tell me a little bit more about how your journey has transpired, the different positions you've held, the different things that you've done.
I'm in this weird middle zone where I'm not quite in academia, but I'm not in conventional broadcasting. I'm not writing full time. I occupy a very strange space, and I'm not sure really anyone else in the weather community does that. And I think that's largely by design and partially by accident, but really largely by design. Growing up, I had a very steadfast passion in that I always wanted to be the conventional TV meteorologist, the person you'd see on air, briefing people for 3.5 minutes, dissecting the science. Because growing up, the only person who I really got to talk weather with was the guy on TV who I watched religiously day in, day out. Every night for 3.5 minutes, someone would talk weather with me, even though it was only a one-way thing through the medium of TV. But I wanted to be that. However, as I approached college, I realized the media landscape was rapidly changing. We just don't have those 40, 50-year veteran broadcasters the way we used to. People don't tune to TV like they used to. It's really the last source of information, certainly not the first source. And so I realized I'd have to carve out a career that would be largely digital. And so my job for years was working at the Washington Post. I was doing social media on the side. I figured social media is a way to instantaneously reach people. I can reach more people on my social media platforms than I ever could doing local TV. Now, granted, I did enjoy my time in local TV. I did Fox 5 for 2.5 years in DC. Loved that. But it sort of illustrated to me some of the inveterate issues with TV in that, even for a severe weather day, I might only have 90 seconds, if that. There'd be days when I'd have 25-second weather hits. If the station wasn't staffed during the afternoon, even if there was a tornado warning, we couldn't break in. Even if there was a destructive severe thunderstorm warning, or I knew 90-mile-an-hour winds were hitting Metro, which is exactly what happened on July 29th, 2023. I was begging to break into programming. Couldn't do it. Football was on. A viewer died, but, I couldn't break in. And it sort of made me think to myself, is this the way I can most efficiently and most effectively use my talents and use my desire to educate, inform, inspire? And it genuinely was a great position, great station, great people, and a great opportunity. I'm immensely grateful.
It is great, though. It's so impressive how your career has transpired.
And yet it's weird because the job I work now is a job that didn't even exist before I showed up to do it. MyRadar reached out to me and said, name the job you want to do, name how you're going to do it, name your salary, name everything, which that's a lot of autonomy. And they basically said, we'll pay you what you ask for to do whatever you want because what you do is valuable. And that was a message from Andy Green, the CEO at MyRadar. And in 2023, I sort of had this moment where I realized we could really build something quite cool here that transcends what local TV does. And so we, at MyRadar, we have 15 million monthly users, but I can draw a box on a map anywhere around the world and instantaneously send a push notification to those people tying to a video that I've done. I can do that video from anywhere in the world, and I don't have someone in my ear saying 30 seconds left, 15 seconds left, wrap. We get very nitty gritty. We get into the details in a way that I genuinely think the public wants. TV has shifted so far away from those complex scientific briefings to more along the lines of, here's a panel graphic with a 7-day forecast or whatever. Here's, your hour by hour planner, but it's such a low lift. There's no reason why a meteorologist should be standing in front of something that you could generate via just a raw output or whatever else. There's no value add for many TV meteorologists. And so at MyRadar, I get to do that value add in a way that makes a difference. I mean, we let people know instantaneously when something big's going on, and I love it. Plus, the contract MyRadar gave me allows me the flexibility to work on other media, and so I can be a freelance meteorologist for DW News, BBC World News, Sky News Arabia, the Australian Today Show. I can do the Washington Post. I can write books. I can appear wherever I need to and want to, and I can still do TV on the side. It's a weird position, and yet it allows me to have all my eggs in all the baskets.
Would you say that one weather event where you weren't able to break into news because of football, was that a kind of tipping point, turning point for you in your career?
I will say that, I loved my local station. I loved my news director. I think that the DC market in particular does not operate as a weather market. And they've had high-end tornadoes before. We'll play a tornado. That killed people. It was an F4. We get high-end storms in DC. I remember on September 1st, 2021, the remnants of Ida were working up the coast. The news director, and this news director was amazing. He now works in Detroit. He was off. And the assistant news director at the time, I think, still sort of viewed me as a rookie. And understandably so. I was 23, 24. And for days, I'd been essentially badgering everyone saying, hey, tornadoes are coming Wednesday. Tornadoes are coming Wednesday. I worked the weekend shows. And on my 7-day forecast, 3 days out, I put the tornado icon because I was that confident in severe weather occurring with the remnants of Ida working up the coast. 2 days before, the night before, I was emailing the entire newsroom, letting everyone know that we had to have our tornado plans in place. And that morning, I had to be there for promos and just a picture shoot. I assumed they would let me stay in the afternoon, and yet they didn't. They said they had enough meteorologists that day. And I remember badgering and being like, but I'm the tornado guy. I'm the only one who has this experience. Even though I might be the youngest, I'm DC's most experienced severe weather meteorologist, and I desperately wanted to stay. And the assistant news director said, no, get out of here, get out of the building. Like, we're not paying you overtime. And I said, I'll do it for free. And he said, get out. And so I'm in my suit and tie and I sprint out of the building and I'm mad. I stamp my foot. I'm like, fine, I'll do it myself. And I sprint out of the building and I'm like actively stripping on Wisconsin Avenue in Bethesda, Maryland, like getting rid of the suit, throwing on gym shorts and t-shirt. And I drive like a bat out of hell to Annapolis, Maryland on a whim because I knew in advance that there would be slightly higher dew points given proximity to the Chesapeake. There's a subtle bay breeze that would impart greater low-level helicity, low-level spin, better easterly component to those surface winds too with that bay breeze. So again, better storm relative helicity. There had been a little bit of clearing earlier on, and that meant we were heating the ground, juicing up the lower atmosphere. There are just like 4 or 5 reasons why I thought Annapolis would be the place to be. And by the time I got there was an EF2, the strongest since La Plata, crossing the road right in front of me, 800 feet away. It was my closest tornado intercept to date. And suddenly, in Maryland. And I'm on the side of the road, doing it selfie style. And I got a call from the assistant news director almost immediately after I posted the video on Twitter. He was mad, like angry. And he said, we need the video. And I said, let me talk to MyRadar. I got to see, because technically they own the video since they paid me to do it. And he hung up on me. And I was shocked. And next thing you know, Fox is running the video and the producers are reaching out. And I'm on air for the next 10 hours. I'm doing live stream tornado coverage as I'm driving. They're driving the radar back at the station for me. I'm driving my truck trying to find the damage path and get to a safe place. As I'm narrating wall to wall, I did the 4 o'clock, 5, 6 o'clock news. I was on nonstop. And after that, they reached out to me and said, got a full-time offer for you down the road. But they, both the news director and assistant news director realized then that this could be something. And then about a year later, on July 5th, 2022, similar situation. I was off. There was a cell that was rotating. I hopped in my truck. I called the assistant news director. I'm like, please, take my live stream. There's going to be a tornado. Trust me. He didn't want to pull away from radar. And so the station missed the opportunity to air a live tornado because they didn't want to pull away from radar, even though I had it live. And this happened like 3 or 4 additional times where, there'd be something and the station would get caught with its pants down. April 22nd, 2023, again, later that year. It just happened time and time again. They gave me great creative freedom in my day-to-day forecasts, but when it came to severe weather, and my bread and butter is that I want to be the person who is leading people through severe weather events. If I can't do that at a TV station, I'll go somewhere where I can do that.
That makes sense. You, by the way, were writing for the Washington Post Capital Weather Gang at an age when most people are just figuring out college plans and what they want to study. Who were the people or influences around you then that helped make those early achievements possible?
Everybody. It really takes a village. I would attribute about 7-8% of my success to my own volition and 92 or 93% of it to literally everybody else. Amazing parents who supported a very quirky kid who's now a quirky adult. Incredible teachers every step of the way. I could name for you right now every teacher I've ever had, 1st grade through 12th grade. Every last one of them made such a big difference, to the point that in 2022, my hometown threw me like a welcome home event, and every teacher I'd ever had showed up and surprised me. It was like this big surprise. It was the nicest day of my life, seeing all the people who I'd loved and who had loved me over the years and supported me and made this happen. But great teachers, great professionals, the number of meteorologists who took me under their wing and mentored me over the years. And then people who are willing to take a chance on me. Paul at Fox 5, who gave me that shot. Jason at the Washington Post. Andy here at MyRadar. It's funny. None of the jobs that I currently hold are jobs I applied to. Never applied to the Washington Post at the beginning. Never applied to MyRadar. Never applied for any of the side, TV hits. And so I also attribute success to people who find me and want to give me a shot.
What did some of these early opportunities teach you about communicating science to a broad audience? Because you have so many different types of followers. You have those that don't know a lot about science, and you have followers that are PhDs in scientific background.
I think the biggest thing is twofold. Number one, I don't consider myself a broadcaster. I don't consider myself, a TV personality or any of that. I consider myself a teacher who happens to work in front of a camera. That was my mantra going into TV. That was my mantra here at MyRadar. I'm simply a teacher who happens to reach a few extra students or a few extra people because there's a camera in front of me. And that goes back to all my amazing teachers in school. You know, when I was in 8th grade, we were learning the difference between physical and chemical reactions. And Karen Runyon, my science teacher, demonstrated a chemical reaction through creating caramel in class and doing caramel apples. And it amazed me how she managed to engage even the problem students, or even the students who would otherwise, by most teachers, be left behind. Warren Phillips in 7th grade took 11 students and helped us do things that would never be possible for a 7th grader. You know, we made a gel electrophoresis, and he taught us how that worked in 7th grade. Randy Karspekin, when I was in 9th grade, my math teacher, he was a joy to learn from. But he started every class with, "Hey gang, blah, 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 blah." And it made, no matter how many students were in that room, it made it feel like we were all just one little big happy family, which is also why I weave that into all my forecasts. I had so many amazing teachers who clearly loved what they did. And so my goal in all my coverage is to not only meet people where they are, no matter how much scientific background they do or don't have, but make it feel like it's a small group, like a small group of us. I try to maintain that intimacy with the viewer. And then I think the bigger thing too, this goes to point number 2. I don't do it if it bores me. And I know that sounds so problematic, but there are times when my employers have said, what do you think about this? And I say, no, it bores me. And if it bores me, it'll bore the viewer. The secret sauce to all this is that I love what I do so much that it comes through. The viewer picks up some of that passion. People can be passionate about anything if you teach them passion, if you show them why they should care about it. And if it's something I don't care about, I don't do it because, the secret sauce is that passion. And I think point number 2, you have to be a good teacher. Make the science soft serve. Floors me. And one thing I'll say about Fox 5, they were amazing about letting me teach whatever and show whatever on air. They never told me what I could and couldn't show. Same thing with the Washington Post, same thing with MyRadar. All my employers have been really good about that. Because, how many times do we hear someone say, oh, you got to write for a 4th grade level, or you got to dumb it down, or even TV news across the board largely dumb stuff down. But my employers have always said to me, if you can make it accessible to people, you can cover it. And so I'll cover a polar vortex disruption. I'll show, a sounding live on air on the morning newscast and explain to people what it means. Because if we can make it soft, serve, and accessible, people will understand it, and people will come to trust the media and scientists more, and that's key too.
And sometimes, bringing up a sounding on the news is what people want to see now, because they can get so much of the other stuff everywhere, right? So give them 100%. A reason to want to see stuff they can't see anywhere else. Most people can't go in and find a sounding on their own. So that's really incredible that you've had the foresight to make some of those things more accessible to the public.
Well, I think to myself, there always has to be a value add. We have to be more than, better than, or different from everything else that's out there. Why would someone watch me when they can say, hey, Siri, what's the forecast? And Siri pulls something up. Conventional news in the past has tried to do that in many ways. They've tried to either make it entertaining, they've tried to make it at times salacious, they've tried to make it whatever. And it doesn't always work. For me, my goal is to either educate people, inspire them, or spark their curiosity, or a combination of all those. And so if I can play into people's natural curiosity, they might not realize they're sitting down to watch a forecast. And then suddenly 90 seconds in, they're like, wow, I never thought about this. I'm going to stick around for more. It's about knowing your audience really well, leveraging that connection you have with them to figure out what do they care about? What are they curious about? And if I get a viewer who asks me a question, I'll almost always do an explainer on it because that shows me people want to know something. And so, yeah, you can get the forecast anywhere these days. People who are trying to get into this career have to ask themselves, why would they get it from you? And that's what I ask myself every day. And there are days when I may not always do it perfectly, but at least I try.
And you've worked across so many different parts of meteorology and writing and broadcasting, field work. I'm curious what you have found most fulfilling to you.
For me, the most fulfilling thing is that light bulb moment when somebody who otherwise didn't care or didn't understand something or doubted their own ability to understand something suddenly puts together something they were always curious about, understands it, can re-explain it, and they realize, hey, I learned something. I was at a bar in Slidell, Louisiana back in early June of last year. And, politically speaking, Slidell is not the place where you would expect climate science to be most well received, particularly from someone who went to Harvard, has spent their whole life on the East Coast. And yet, I remember being at the bar, I had my MyRadar shirt on, and people came up and they were asking me weather questions and even some climate questions. And initially they were skeptical. And an hour later, they all had my phone number. They still text me questions to this day. And they were understanding these things. And they were so excited because all these things they had wondered about since their childhood, why does this happen? Why does this happen? They grasped, they got, and suddenly they were more receptive to science they otherwise might have initially refuted. And it was such a productive dialogue. And I still will answer their questions via text anytime something is moving through, areas along I-10 between Baton Rouge and Slidell. I still get texts from the same group of people at the bar. And I love that. My whole life is about that light bulb moment. And if people are excited about something or curious about something, that's a job well done in my book.
That's awesome. You just got to get your sister to get that light bulb moment when it comes to weather, right?
I'm trying. It's, how, and this is not a knock to my mother. I love my parents dearly, but I swear she bought, I don't know why, for the coffee table, this basket of random round things. There's a decorative styrofoam moss thing in there, like a pine cone. I'm like, Mom, did you go foraging or something? And so last year when I went home for Christmas, I replaced all those foolish nondescript round things with 3D printed hailstones. And that is now the centerpiece on the living room coffee table. And it sparks conversation. And I think Emily was like, wow, those are actual size. And so I'm slowly sneaking the science in at home too.
All right. So we'll go back to kind of your storm chasing part of your career. And you have such a presence online. How do you balance being safe while also making sure you're appropriately communicating the seriousness of the situation weather-wise?
I think one thing that many storm chasers fall into, and TV folks too, is confidence and ego. And, when you're doing TV, a lot of people, because they're reaching so many folks at once, get this larger-than-life version of themselves. And I think in storm chasing, it's easy to do so in a similar vein, in that day in, day out, you're dancing with death. You're up close and personal with tornadoes. You're driving into situations that everybody else would flee from. And people get overconfident because they've done it 100 times, 200 times, and they've seen and done some crazy stuff. And I worry that in the future, we're going to see more people getting overconfident. For me, if I go into storm chase and I'm not a little bit anxious or apprehensive, then something's wrong. My goal is to always respect the elements because I'm preaching to people at home that they should be respecting the elements. I need to as well. And so I might not always get the most up-close tornado footage. I might not always be the daredevil who's, clinging to a utility pole during a hurricane, hanging on for dear life. I might not always have the most, crazy footage. But I want to show to my audience that I'm doing my job safely with safety in mind because that's what I preach all along. That I should be respecting the elements. Because ultimately, Mother Nature always wins. The other thing, too, I almost love sometimes being back a little farther from the storm to show the broader overall structure. If it's not tornadic, I do like being close to the tornado. But I relish those structure shots because I spend so much time explaining the science of how a supercell works or the eye of a hurricane works or whatever else. I spent years in front of a green screen. Now, the atmosphere is my green screen. I can say to folks, look at the rear flank downdraft. Look at this roll of helicity wrapping into the storm. Look at whatever, on the boundary. And people love that real life classroom nature of it. And so for me, storm chasing is about taking my viewers on a front row seat to this pageant of beauty in the atmosphere and understanding the science of it, not just that adrenaline footage that some folks do.
Absolutely. And you're part of a much larger weather ecosystem as a whole. You're part of the ecosystem that includes researchers, model developers, emergency managers, other teams. Talk to me about how you see yourself fitting into that web.
I view it as almost and this will sound so silly, I view it almost like a school cafeteria in that even if everyone sits at slightly different tables, you for the most part know everybody and you interact with everybody. And if you have a question, you might swing by and sit down at someone else's table and ask them a question or vice versa. Even last night, I got someone who had sent a video of an incredibly large hailstone that fell on April 24th near Matador, Texas. I was on that storm. So was Adam Lucio. Adam Lucio got 5.3-inch hail. I was getting big hail too, but I got a nice tornado out of that. But when I watched this video, I thought this has to be a biggie. This could be like a 7-inch or plus, challenging world records. And immediately I thought, who would be the people to ask about this? Sean Hua, Ian Jamanko, Matt Kumjian, Victor Gansini. And I tagged them, and there's a follow-up dialogue going on right now, and they're going to run some photogrammetry and answer some questions and look into it. And it's just so cool to me that we all exist in this modern ecosystem where if we have a question, we can ask someone, and vice versa. You know, there are broadcast Mets who reach out to me all the time with questions or wanting me to double check stuff. And there are times when I might be a little bit beyond my depth in a specific subject, and I have to reach out to a specialist. And I love that we can do that. And so I view us all as puzzle pieces, complementing and supplementing the work that one another does, because none of us can do it all on our own. None of us knows everything. We all know a little more than someone else about something, and vice versa. And so if I can constantly be learning throughout my career, that's going to be an exciting career.
And thinking about the larger ecosystem, how do you think we can improve it?
I think we need to do a better job at self-policing. I think, and what I mean by that is, as social media takes over and people begin to realize how much, social media has already taken over. The biggest weather personalities nowadays are social media folks, not necessarily network meteorologists. There's more name recognition for, I'd argue nowadays, especially within the youth, there's more name recognition for like Ryan Hall or Max Velocity than, folks who might be veterans on the Weather Channel or the Today Show or whoever else. The balance is shifting towards social media very fast. And everybody, especially those in legacy media, are trying to get into social media too. I'm seeing a bunch of my TV colleagues begin to post more clickbaity stuff. They're beginning, and not all are, but some are. Some are posting 2-week out GFS output. I recently saw a Met in the Carolinas post this outlandish 2.5-week snow graphic. It's something that would never happen 10 years ago, but they're able to monetize. It's very easy to make $30,000 a year on social media, even as a mid-sized, influencer. A high tier one could be making millions. And so if you have a bunch of broadcast meteorologists who have 100,000, 200,000 Facebook followers, it's going to be easy for them to make $25,000 to $50,000 a year on Facebook, which is crazy to think about. Imagine if I dangled $50,000 in front of someone and said, hey, clickbait a little bit or push the boundaries a little bit. A lot of conventional broadcasters are going to be tempted to do so. So I think in the next few years, we'll see a bifurcation of the field where we hold on to, the Matt Devitt's, the James Spans of the world who have done social media well and always do it well and in a scientifically integrity-filled way. And then we'll have another branch of the field who pushes the envelope, posts things that are not scientifically defensible, and makes the rest of the field lose their credibility. And I hope as a field we can police ourselves better, or that the AMS can get involved and put out a statement about social media best practices. But I'm very worried about the broadcast element of the field.
I can kind of see where you're coming from with that. And I also wonder if we're going to see more of that dividing line from, the side of us who have degrees in the science and meteorology. And then there's a whole sector of it where they don't have the degrees or the background. Yeah,
I worry about that too. It puts me in a weird boat because on the one hand, some of the best forecasters I've ever met don't have a degree. They might be storm chasers. Like 9 times out of 10, if I'm looking for a convective forecast, I would take a storm chaser's forecast over a conventional meteorologist, notwithstanding the Storm Prediction Center. They're amazing, but specialists. Whereas there's one side where, experience does matter a lot. On the other hand, it's definitely true that to really understand the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, you have to have that degree, more so than a certificate, more so than anything else. When I did local TV, only half of the meteorologists in the station were actually meteorologists. There was one who, I remember one time there's a tornado warning and this weather presenter cried because they didn't know what to do. And you're exactly right. The meteorologists come in all shapes and sizes, and meteorologists come in all levels of quality. I think we're going to see that divide even more. But I wouldn't divvy it up from degrees and non-degrees. I'd divvy it up from those who have the passion to go as far into the material as they can, degreed or not, and those who just don't.
No, that's a really good point. Let's talk more about the science in the form of sensors and data quality. Where do you think we can see improvement with that?
I love doing forecasting in, for example, like Kansas or Oklahoma or even now Maryland because of the mesonets. I'd say, what is it? Probably a half dozen states have mesonets, more so than anything else. If you said to me, I'm going to write you a blank check to improve forecasting, what would you do? I'd do two things. I would blanket every state with a dense mesonet, one weather station per county, and a high quality weather station. I mean, seeing what the Oklahoma mesonet has done, it's mind boggling. And if we can, because the computer modeling is getting so advanced, especially with AI forecasts, that probably 10, 15 years from now, we'll have tornado warnings issued before the cap even breaks, before a storm even initiates, or right at convective initiation. Models are only so good as the data going in. And to me, I'd like to see a denser spattering of ground observations going in. If we can do more mesonets the way Oklahoma has, I think we'll be golden. And then the other thing too, obviously weather balloons. I wish we could do weather balloons every 6 hours rather than every 12 hours. And I wish we had, especially not only more West Coast observing stations, but more remote Alaska observing stations. And I know this isn't feasible, but I wish there would be a way to get buoys over the central eastern Pacific to sample weather systems by releasing sondes. I don't know if that technology is here yet. I don't know if that technology is coming, but I would love it if we could just release like 3 weather balloons daily from remote parts of the eastern Pacific or northeast Pacific and sense the systems that are coming downwind.
Just imagine what that would do to the quality of model output.
Oh, yeah. It's mind-boggling to think about the advancements in even the past 5 years. I mean, Google DeepMind's model became the #1 hurricane model this year. This time last year, no one had ever even heard of it. It didn't really exist, and now it's #1. And this is I don't know how recently Google began developing that, but it's only in the past few years. I'm so excited to think about what things will look like 10 years down the road. I think forecasting, the value of a human forecaster is going down. It's unfortunate to say, but it's true. I mean, I consider myself a very talented forecaster, and yet 9 times out of 10, a model is going to beat me. Maybe 8 times out of 10. I'm decent. But 9 times out of 10, a model will beat me, especially as we introduce machine learning, more on forecasts, etc. My value is as a communicator. I worry that AI is making amazing advancements on the technological side of things for forecasting. I worry AI is going to rapidly impede our communication abilities, and that's going to make my job tougher in the future.
Talk a little bit more about why you feel that's going to make your job tougher.
If I look on social media right now, if I was to pull up Facebook, most of the most viral posts are either AI-generated slop with apocryphal, random, non-scientific weather photos that either don't exist or whatever else, or the captions are all AI generated. And then on Twitter, half the profiles, it seems, are bots. The dead internet theory is quickly becoming a real thing. And so it's going to be tougher for me to sift through the noise. The other thing too, clickbait's always going to reign #1, but not only does clickbait mislead the public, but if the most viral posts are the most outlandish ones, that makes it tougher for actual information to cut through the noise. And so I'm having a tougher time getting my forecasts to beat bogus forecasts from AI enterprises. I mean, there's one, it's a Gulf Coast area weather page, and they post one model output every day, and then they post a crazy 5-paragraph, slang soliloquy about the weather. And it's funny. It's funny to read, but it always goes viral, regardless of whether or not the underlying weather phenomenon is legitimate, appropriately communicated, etc. I think we're heading very quickly to a point where people's #1 reason for going on social media won't be to gather information, or won't even be to be passively fed information. It will be whatever the dopamine hits are, whatever's the funniest, whatever's the sexiest. And I know that's uncomfortable to discuss, but it's true. As the public gets trained to reach lower and lower for quality information, the quality of the information will inherently be degraded. It worries me.
There's just so many layers to this when you think about it.
It's something I think about all day, every day. Like, how do I break through the noise? The most entertaining stuff is always what goes the most viral, but that's not always what people need. On the day of a tornado outbreak, I'd love it if my information, because I'd like to think I give among the most quality information, I'd love it if my information was at the top of the algorithm. But how am I going to compete with an AI-generated video of a cat working at McDonald's? I'm not.
Do you think, though, as we possibly go into this type of transition you're talking about and thinking could happen, it makes jobs like what you're doing eventually become even more important, right? I mean, there has to be a trade-off somewhere because people do need this valuable, more important information. And if they do eventually stop going to social media for it, then it's going to elevate the value of those other places where maybe they used to go or start to go, right?
I think you're exactly right. I think that the job is going to become both more important and simultaneously much more difficult. I mean, this job as a whole, my career, is more difficult than it would have been 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I could have graduated, worked my way up to a good-sized TV market, made a great salary, and done 5 or 6 quality 3-minute briefings per day. And then I'd go home, and that'd be it. I'd make a great paycheck. Nowadays, I mean, when I was doing the morning show, for example, I was doing 30, 40 TV hits every morning while simultaneously writing for the Washington Post and working for MyRadar and doing everything else. I have to be on all platforms. So the career in general is much more difficult and scattered than it would have been decades ago. But we have to reach people where they are. And so, I mean, heck, if I could do weather forecasts on Webkins, if Webkins had a big audience, I'd be doing weather forecasts on Webkins. I will do a weather forecast anywhere that people are there because my goal is to reach everybody where they're at. Now, that means I do a lot of multitasking. I'm on every platform, and it's exhausting at times. I mean, during a hurricane, I might be awake for 40, 50 hours without sleep, and I might not even move from this chair here for hours on end because I'm on every different TV station and every different streaming platform, every different everything. So it's going to be a much tougher job, but to your point, you're exactly right. It's going to be much more important to figure out where are people, how do we get information to them, and how can we reach them where they're at.
And I would think that this makes the private sector possibly that much more valuable when it comes to solid weather information, solid observations, all those things, especially if social media eventually kind of takes its decline for like good, informative, believable, true information scientifically.
I think you're right. I think the private sector, especially what folks like you guys do, is going to become, I mean, it's already very important. I think that importance will be elevated in the years ahead because it amazes me how many municipalities, when they're trying to figure out when to put salt in the roads, how many companies when they're trying to figure out when to harvest what, companies when they're trying to figure out when to transport what, how many of those large-scale companies actually don't have a quality source of weather information? It amazes me how many companies have existed for years or decades getting information only from one Facebook page or one TV station. Yeah. And as the number of sources increases, the amount of noise increases in tandem. And there's so much bombardment of weather information, some that's good, some that's bad, some that's misleading, that it almost gets to the point where Joe Schmo at home has too many sources and it's information overload. And how does he contextualize and make sense of it? And that's when it becomes all the more important for a business to have a single quality trusted source. You folks, for example, you're a single entity, a quality entity with degreed experts who know their stuff and can translate that limitless amount of information into an actionable item that someone at home, whether it be an insurer, whether it be a private client, whether it be someone in charge of transportation, a municipality, anyone can act on. And so I think the private sector, what we do at MyRadar, what you folks do, is growing rapidly in importance.
If you could give us your forecast for the future, not about tomorrow's weather, about how we prepare, how we communicate, how we stay resilient, what would it be?
This will be an unpopular idea. I think
that's what I appreciate about you, by the way, that you maybe are not afraid to talk about the unpopular ideas, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, like part of my career sometimes has to be being the squeaky wheel or covering a story that is uncomfortable to cover in a nuanced way. And there's a respectful way to do it. And I don't always do it appropriately, but I try. But I think, to answer your question, one conversation we have to have in the future, and we should be having now, is every time a disaster happens, should we rebuild? Should we rebuild the way we did before? Should we rebuild in the same area? We always see these scenes of devastation, and the newscasters always go and they interview someone who courageously says, we'll be back, it'll be the same as before. And that's very heartwarming, but also foolish at times. If I have a house on stilts and my neighbors have fallen into the ocean, I've probably built a little too close to the water. If I live 2 feet above sea level, I might have a beautiful view. Maybe 20 years ago, the house was destroyed and I rebuilt, but should I have rebuilt there? Should I have rebuilt the same way? Look at what happened with Ian. Charlie hit on August 13, 2004, ravaged Fort Myers Beach. During Ian, a bigger storm with a twice as significant storm surge ravaged the same area. And yet, many of the homes that I visited right afterwards to interview people at were built in a way that was resilient. They built such that the main living quarters were actually the second floor of their home and only the garage was impacted. And so, sure, they might have lost a car, but they didn't lose their home. The surge only went through the lowest floor. That's what I want to see more of. Not, we're going to build the same house, the same footprint, the same whatever. So that's one part of it. It's building better, smarter in the future and knowing when to not build somewhere. Now let's talk about tornado country. We have, I think it's something like 13-14% of people in Mississippi and Alabama live in mobile homes. And, socioeconomically, I understand why they do. And admittedly, they have to. However, it puts us in a tough spot where it's not realistic to expect that for every tornado watch, people relocate to a place ahead of time, even if they live in a mobile home. But when a tornado warning happens, how do they get to a shelter quickly? It's not realistic for them to be given 12 minutes notice and expected to get to a site-built location, especially given how Mississippi and Alabama are settled. So for me, it might be a matter of working with people in the off-season, December, January, February, figuring out how each specific person there can create a severe weather plan so they know what to do when the big one comes. It floors me how many people get decision paralysis when they're told it's time. If I say you have 10 minutes and a massive tornado is going to wipe away your house, the seconds are counting down. What do people do? And oftentimes it's decision paralysis.
Freeze. Yeah, sure.
I mean, that's why pilots, for example, will practice the same emergency protocol 200, 300 times in a simulator, such that when the what hits the fan, they don't get that decision paralysis.
Muscle memory almost, yeah.
100%. And so I'd like to figure out what educational materials I can build ahead of time in the off season, before tornado season, to just drill into people what they can and should do for their unique circumstance. Because I'm not naive to the fact that me saying, get to your basement now doesn't apply to many people. Get to your safe space doesn't work for a lot of people. If Mima's 93 years old and she's living with mobility issues and her caretaker only swings by once a week, how are you going to get her to shelter? What is she going to do? There's so many people that don't have an easy answer, and I wish the field of meteorology would care more about addressing those not easy answers. One of the best lessons I learned was when I went down on a whim to chase Hurricane Matthew. And I had a bunch of hotels booked on the beach, and they said they'd stay open for media personnel no matter what. Well, they didn't. They closed. And I was too young at that point to rent a car. I was only 19. And so by circumstance, I wound up in a hurricane shelter in Volusia County, Florida. And let me tell you, it was eye-opening. There were people in there who were suffering from drug addiction. There were people in there who were there because they had nowhere else to be. There were people in there who were on oxygen tanks because they couldn't get the care at their assisted living facility because they had shut down and the nurses left town. There were people in there who had moved in from Texas and had never dealt with a hurricane before and were completely frozen and had no idea what to do. Getting to meet these people and just interact with them in a conversational way for 2-3 days taught me so much about communicating to the public and understanding that sometimes people don't evacuate because they can't. One of my favorite moments when I was in that hurricane shelter was when there was a little girl who was about 3 or 4 years old. Her name was Erin, and her parents had just moved in from Houston. They were brand new to Florida, had never dealt with a hurricane before. And the parents, I could tell the parents were nervous because Hurricane Matthew was a Cat 4 at that point. And Erin would have been nervous going to a shelter too. Now, Erin's favorite game to play when she was little was to play sleepover, to bring her bed into her parents' room or vice versa and have a slumber party. And so her parents told her that she was going to a sleepover with 150 people. And that way, that sort of softened the story of you're going to a hurricane shelter for survival. And Erin was so excited when she got to the shelter. She thought everyone there was a friend there for a sleepover for her. Now, that kind of backfired at about 1 a.m. when everybody was asleep. I was awake because I don't sleep. And Erin was apparently awake as well. And she woke up and she thought, what do all sleepovers need? A pillow fight. So she took her pillow, little 4-year-old, took her pillow and went over. And there's an elderly couple sleeping. And she just whammed the elderly couple with the pillow in the middle of the night. You can imagine that caused quite the commotion. Old guy's glasses fly off and whatnot. I mean, it was a very, very memorable scene. But it made me think that her parents got her to the shelter by saying, you're going to go play sleepover. And so now sometimes when I do forecast, or when we have a big hurricane coming in, I have pre-made content for kids. How to talk to your kids about hurricanes, how to talk to your kids about a tornado outbreak, how to prep with your kids. Because if your kids are actively involved in the preparatory process, it humanizes it for them. But that education's empowering. Because if we make weather-ready kids, they'll grow up into weather-ready adults. And so for me, it's about really getting to know those people and know who you're serving and providing them what they need, not what your company thinks they need.
No, that makes so much sense. And I'm sure that being in that hurricane shelter changed the way you forever communicate moving forward when it comes to weather.
100%. It definitely made me understand the human side of things more. I feel like the media is so sort of like, well, they didn't evacuate, they should have evacuated.
It's not that easy.
There are so many. I mean, the economic toll, the hundreds of dollars one will spend per day. I mean, what is it? Half of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. People don't have an extra $1,500 lying around to, take an undesired location, or undesired vacation for 3 days in a hotel that will be experiencing surge pricing. Dealing with all the gas to evacuate far enough inland so you get a hotel room. The fast food and the food for days on end. There's so many factors, and I think it's interesting. I think that's factored into recent political elections. And I won't get political because I don't subscribe to either side. I don't like politics in general. But I think the biggest issue with our political system is that there are two vastly different groups in the country who don't know how each other lives. And that's largely divided financially. People in the coasts tend to be wealthier than people in the middle of the country. But I feel like there's very little crossover or mutual understanding of how city life is versus country life. No one from Boston is vacationing in Texarkana, Arkansas. Nobody from Mobeetie, Texas is traveling to Seattle for a weekend. There's a lack of understanding. I'm really blessed in my position to be able to sort of translate between worlds. I spend 3-4 months a year in the middle of the country. I love it out there. It's such a beautiful place that the coasts completely overlook. And vice versa. I think people in the middle of the country don't necessarily fully understand how people in the coast live. And there's just not enough crossover. We'd all be much better people if we took a week to, people on the coast would be much better people if they took a week to travel America and to see what America really is like. And you meet a lot of people who don't have, 2 nickels to scrape together for an evacuation or don't have the money to put in a shelter. And you get to know them better. And I mean, I love it out there. I'm building a house in Oklahoma beginning in 2028. But yeah, I think the best part of my job is that I get off the beaten path and really know the people I'm serving. And that's my favorite part.
Matthew, this has been such an insightful conversation for our listeners, for myself. Thank you for sharing not just the science, but also the lived experience and perspective behind it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate the platform, so thank you.
A big thank you to everyone who joined us for this episode of Behind the Forecast. If you've enjoyed this content, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We're lining up more episodes with some of the most recognizable and influential names in weather. Or check out some of our more recent episodes where we delve into personal stories and insights from some of the most trusted names in weather, like James Spann of the Alabama Weather Network, Jim Cantori of the Weather Channel, and Ginger Zee from Good Morning America and ABC News. Until next time, I'm Chelsea Ingram. I'll see you behind the forecast.